the estates, how to set up and play. First thing you'll do is lay out the game board along with the 6 company certificates. The color of the certificates correspond with these floor cubes. Next, you'll randomly draw the floor cubes. There are 36 of these in the game, 6 per company certificate, ranging in values from 1 to 6. Put all 36 in the bag and randomly draw 24 and put them in this 3 by 8 configuration. Next, you'll take the 12 rooftop tiles. You'll put them face down. These also range in values from 1 to 6. Shuffle them completely. These will get revealed when they get selected for an auction. You'll also set out your 3 building permits, your 1 cancel marker, and the 1 mayor hat. Each player is going to be given 12 of these $1 million checks. Money is kept secret in the game. Randomly select a start player, and you're ready to begin. On a player's turn, the first thing they can do is they may stow one of their checks away for an endgame victory point. They would simply turn it over and tuck it under the game board, and that'll earn them 1 victory point at the end of the game. Once they do that, though, that money can no longer be used throughout the game, and it also can't be checked by other players. After deciding if they want to stow one of their checks, the player is going to select one of these wooden pieces and put it up for auction. Once the active player selects one of these pieces, it's going to be a once around clockwise auction. So you're going to start with the player to the left of the active player. They can decide to pass or they can make a bid. If they make a bid, it has to be higher than any prior bids, and then it'll get back around to the active player. At that point, the active player has a decision to make. They can take the cash from the highest bid, and then that player that made the high bid would take the wooden piece and execute the action, or the active player can decide to pay that amount. They would have to pay the amount of the highest bid to the player that made that highest bid. And then the active player, by doing that, would get to execute the wood piece. One other rule, if all players pass during this once around auction, the active player or the auctioneer, they actually get the piece for free then. So let's see how each of these wooden pieces works now. Let's start with the floor cubes. In order to auction off one of these floor cubes, it has to be one of the 3 cubes on either end of this grid. So let's say in a prior auction, let's say this was auctioned off and placed on the board, the active player could select this piece, or this piece, since these are the 3 on this end, or this piece, or this piece. It's the 3 pieces on both ends that can be selected. Something to keep in mind, building cubes and roof tiles can actually only be selected for auction if they have a legal placement on the game board. So let's say in this example, this building cube was still one of the N3. The active player, the auctioneer, selected this for auction. We do the once around. The winning player, the one that actually paid the money, now is going to execute this. So let's cover the rules of building cube placement. So here are the important rules about placing a floor cube. It has to be placed on the next open row spot or on top of a roofless floor if it's a lower number. So some of the important rules: the row has to start near the street, and you can't leave empty spots. So you couldn't start by placing there because that would leave an empty spot. So since this is the start of the game, the only 3 spots legal for placement are these 3 closest to the street. Also, you'll notice some of these sand pits. These spots indicate that only 1 cube can be placed there. There can only be 1 floor. Whereas these normal ones we'll see can be stacked as long as the cube you're putting on top is less than the current value. So by placing here, you're forcing any subsequent players, the only legal cube that could be put on top of this would be a 1, since it's less than 2. Also, you can never build past the current limit. So let's say these spots were filled. The game starts by default, the river is the limit. So once this spot is filled, you can't go past the limit. We'll see how this limit can change through the use of these wooden pieces. The final very important rule about placing a building cube: if you're the first one to place or buy one of a particular color, you actually get the company certificate. So the first player to buy and place the red gets the red company certificate. Players can have multiple certificates if they're the ones to place those cubes. Let's look at a couple other examples. Let's say that player finished. We go to the next player for the next turn. Let's say they auction off this one, because remember, it's one of the three ends on either side. The player that wins this can now place it. Remember, it has to go on to the next open row spot or on top of a roofless building. So legal placements for this one would be here, or here, or here, since it's the next open spot in the row, or on top of a roofless building if it's less. And since 1 is less than 2, the player could also make that decision. Since they're the first one placing a purple cube, that player would get the company certificate. All right, here I fast forward a little bit. Let's say this was the next building cube auctioned. We can see legal placements for this. This building already has a roof on it, so we can't go on top of that. 2 is not less than 1, it's not less than 2, so those are off limits. It's less than 6, but that's on a sand spot that can only have 1 building cube, so is that. 2 can't be placed there, since it's not less than 1. So the only legal spots, I think, are the next spot in each of these rows, or on top of here, since 2 is less than 3. As you're deciding where to place, you are allowed to look underneath the stack to see the values of all the cubes placed. And as we've talked about, it's that player that places the first cube of a color that actually gets those company certificates. So once each of the colored cubes gets placed, all those company certificates are not going to be in players' hands. The next type of wooden piece are the rooftops. Just like the building cubes, you can't select it for auction if it doesn't have an eligible space. So if there were no cubes on the board yet, you couldn't say, oh, I want to auction a roof tile. But since we have buildings here that can have roofs, the active player would select it, they would reveal it, and then we would do the auction as normal, and then the winning player gets to select one of the roofless buildings and place it on top of. The next 3 wooden pieces that can be auctioned, the building permits, the cancel marker, or the mayor's hat, the winning player can actually decide to place or discard that piece, whereas the winner of the building cube or the rooftop, they actually have to place that into a legal spot. So let's talk about the building permits next. These can be used to increase or decrease the length of the row by the indicated slash marks. So the active player can decide, I want to auction this building permit. Auction would work the same way. The winning player that pays the money can now place this. They would select one of the rows to either decrease or increase the length of the row by 2. Now the change has to be legal. So they couldn't decide, I want to decrease this row by 2 because it only has 1 space left because of that cube placement. But they could decide, I'm going to decrease this row by 2. So this was the default. Decreasing it by 2 now prohibits any cubes from being placed there, and you would just put that marker there. They can also make the decision, you know what, I want to increase the length of the row by the indicated slashes. So maybe I want to increase this by 2. So 1, 2, 2 extra spots until this row becomes complete. Keep in mind, this can now convert a row that maybe was complete to incomplete by extending, or in this example, by placing here or here, I'm decreasing by 2 spots. Let's do a couple more examples. Let's say in a subsequent auction, player selects this one and the winning player says, oh, I want to extend this row by 3. 1, 2, 3. So they'll place it there. Just like it can't be impossible to decrease past where a cube is, you also can't extend past this side of the game board. Also, the winning player, let's say it's a subsequent auction, can place 2 markers in the same row. You simply just update the increased or decreased length. So let's say the winning player they really want to extend the life of this row. They couldn't decrease it because that would be impossible, but they want to increase it by 1. So it's literally just the net effect. And so since we're increasing by 1, we just do that and we put the markers together. One other important consideration, we've been talking about complete and incomplete rows. The end of the row is only half of the equation. So for a row to be complete, it has to go either to its natural boundary or to an adjusted boundary and all of the buildings in the row have to have roofs. So even if cubes got placed here, it's at its limit, those buildings would have to each have a roof tile on top. That's what designates a row as complete. It's at its limit and all the buildings have a roof. Next is the cancel cube or cancel marker. The winning player of this simply is able to discard one of the previously placed building permits out of the game. So let's say the winner of this says, you know what, I don't want this row to be extended by 3. I'm going to discard this out of the game. And the adjustment happens immediately. You could also discard one of these, just one of them, and then you make the net adjustment. Also, just like before, you can't make a discard. That would be impossible to make the adjustment. So let's say in this example, the winning player of the cancel marker does like the idea of having this row being decreased by 2. So they're going to discard this from the game with their cancel marker, and then the net adjustment is this goes back to being only that many spaces long. So this is near completion. Once this building now gets a roof tile, this row would be complete. The final wooden piece is the mayor's hat. The winning player has the option to discard it or place it on one of the 3 rows. At the end of the game, complete rows are going to be worth positive points for players. Incomplete rows are going to be worth negative points. What the mayor's hat does is double the points in that row, either positive or negative. So let's say the winning player just decides to place it there. This hat's never going to move once it's placed. So those are all the different types of wooden pieces that can be placed for auction and placed on the board. Once the placement's done, simply go to the next player in clockwise order and repeat the process. Gameplay will continue going around the table until one of the 2 endgame conditions are met. The game will end immediately if 2 of the rows are complete, meaning they are at their limit and they all have roof tiles, or the game can also end if it's impossible to complete any more buildings on the game board. So again, I fast forward a little bit. Let's say the next player decides to auction off this roof tile, and the winning player, you can see the only legal placement, the only building without a roof tile, would be that one. So at that point, we can see we actually have 2 rows that are complete now. These rows go to their limit, that building permit. This one's going to the default limit, which is the river, and all the buildings have roof tiles. This row, the 2 buildings have roof tiles, but it's not even close to getting to its limit. So one of the 2 endgame conditions was met. So the game immediately ends since we have 2 complete rows. For endgame scoring, you'll remember that complete rows are going to score positive points for players, while any incomplete rows are going to score negative points. And here's why it was important to be on top of a building. It's only the player with the top building floor that is actually going to score those points for the building. So we know these 2 rows are going to be positive. Since they were complete, it would only be the gray player, the one that first placed the gray cube and got the gray company certificate, that's going to score the points for this building. So you score all points. So the 6 on the roof tile, the 3 for the gray cube, and the 4 for the yellow cube. The yellow player doesn't score any points since they weren't on top. So it's just the top player, the gray player in this example, that's going to score all those points. So you're simply going to go through now and score each building positively or negatively for the player that has the top building cube. Remember, incomplete rows are worth negative points. So here the yellow player has the top building cube, so they're going to get negative 12. You can see the 6 for the roof plus the 6 for the cube. Unfortunately, this row is also doubled by the mayor's hat. So since this is doubled, all the points get doubled, positive or negative. So this player is now going to get negative 24 points. The standard negative 12 doubled to 24. The player with the green company certificate is also going to get a double negative here. So they're going to get 12 negative points. It would have been great for these players maybe if this hat was on a different row. It would have given double positive points to those players, but at least their negative points wouldn't have gotten doubled. So to complete final scoring, simply give all players their positive and negative points. Don't forget to give players 1 victory point for each check that they tucked under the game board during gameplay. most points will win the game. Money left in players' hands is not worth anything, but it is a tiebreaker. So if two players are tied on points, the player with the most checks left will win the game. And that should be everything you need to set up and play the estates.